Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Brunsanti. You know that. Finally, after months and months of trying to connect for podcast recording, my guest today is Samuel Broaden. Hi, Samuel.
Hi, Heather. Oh my gosh, I know.
Yay.
So back and forth, but we're here and
We
it's
are
amazing.
here. It's wonderful. And I'll say most of it was my fault. Either forgetting or having to reschedule or whatever, but I'm glad we're finally on screen together here talking. We did meet in real life. We met in
We
October
did.
in
We
Texas,
did,
so
yes.
that was nice. Okay, so Samuel, tell people what you want them to know about you before we start our conversation.
Yeah, wow. Let's see. Yeah, my name is Samuel Broden. I am the owner of Honoring Childhood. You can find us over on Instagram at Honoring Childhood. I've been in the early education field since 2005. And now I'm just working to help support and mentor educators and admin and just get out some of these wonderful ideas on childhood and just letting children be who they are and kind of taking that control piece out of it. But yeah, that's me. I love childhood. I love nature. I love conversations with children. All of that. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
me.
All right. Well, so I heard you at IPA, the IPA USA conference in Texas last fall. I'll just put that out for anyone who hasn't already checked out IPA USA. Um,
Yes.
and I heard you talk there about weapon play. And that is a topic that I've recorded an episode about, but it was a long time ago. But it's a topic that I um have changed my mind about over the course of, the 30 years that I've been doing this. So I like to talk about it, and I like to put some of those ideas and some of the things that changed my mind out to other people occasionally. And
Yeah.
I told you before we started recording that when I listened to your presentation at IPA, um, even though I had already changed my mind, you presented perspectives I hadn't considered before. Specifically, I had never thought sort of intentionally about those ideas. So I'm so
Yeah.
glad that you're here. We have to start with a quote. That's the rule.
Let's do it.
So this comes from a book called We Don't Play with Guns Here: War, Weapon, and Superhero Play in the Early Years by Penny Holland. It's part of a great book series from the UK called Debating Play that it's not super new, but it's good. So anyway, this is just a very general introduction to our conversation from the very first page of the preface
Nice.
of the book.
Perfect.
Um so Penny Holland writes, for approximately the past 30 years in early years settings in primary schools in England, we've operated with a zero tolerance approach to this area of play. This means children are not allowed to bring manufactured toy weapons into settings, to construct weapons from construction, technology, or found materials, and are not allowed to enact scenarios associated with superhero war or play fighting. Same could be said of the United States. She's
Yes, yes, exactly.
and then she just a couple sentences down, she says, as a parent and early years practitioner, I supported this approach to war, weapon, and superhero play, believing it to be consistent with my feminist and pacifist principles, and I enforced this approach rigorously. So that was that's a nutshell description of me. It really was my pacifism
Yes,
um,
yes.
was really guiding the kind of play that I
Yeah,
was,
definitely.
deeming to be valuable or not valuable or
Mhm,
dangerous or
mhm,
whatever.
mhm.
So,
Yeah.
so talk now, Samuel. Talk about it.
I think that's interesting because it is one of those things I think that we've all kind of grown accustomed to the fact of like it's just an automatic no.
Mhm.
Like there's no reason to think about it, there's no anything. And sometimes I think even even just out of habit we'll just say no, we'll stop the play, we'll interrupt it, all of those things. And that's how I was for like the longest time. Um really up until about maybe like 2 or 3 years ago is when I really started like changing my mind on why I was saying no to this type of play, why I was not allowing it. Really just having that kind of reflection on what the why is for, right?
Hmm.
I mean, what the no is for. And I think that that's something really important in the work that we do. Like, we should always be wondering, like, why is it that I'm saying no to this? Why is it that I'm not allowing this type of play? And when we kind of can take that step back and take that self-reflection piece and really think, is it because of me? Like, is it something in me that's uncomfortable with this? Is it something in me that doesn't really care for this? And just really trying to unpack that, because for me at least, just because something makes me uncomfortable doesn't mean that it's not something that the children
Hmm.
should be able to do.
Yeah.
um and I think, that's a hard thing for a lot of us to process, and to kind of get out of that being uncomfortable with that type of play, and just really looking at it as what it is, and looking at it as, obviously this is something that the children enjoy doing, so maybe we can dig a little bit deeper, and not just go with that automatic response of, it's not allowed, or we don't do that. So that's really kind of how I started this whole kind of shift of my thinking in
Hmm.
terms of this type of play, is just really trying to just take the time to rethink and think a little bit more deeply as to, like, why my response was what it was.
Hmm.
um, and I've told this story 1,000 times, and anyone who listens to this who's already heard this story is going to be like, "Oh my God, they could probably say it."
There's always
And
new people. That's what I tell myself. There's always
that's
someone who hasn't heard
always,
it yet.
always at least somebody new. um i was uh I was working as a kindergarten teacher at a forest school, and this is where this idea really kind of took flight for me. I was noticing a lot of this type of play because we were in the forest all day long.
Hmm.
And so that's a huge part of what the children were doing. Sticks and rocks and gun, all of that
Yeah.
stuff was happening. And I was saying, no, we don't do that. We don't do that here. We don't do that here. And one day I just noticed it, and I was like, okay, I need to, like, take a step back and think a little bit more about why this is, because clearly they're going to do it, and they're
Yeah.
really enjoying it.
Yeah.
um and so I just decided myself that I wanted to hear from them about this kind of play and what they enjoyed about it, and having a conversation with them. And it's funny because I had a conversation with them, and I started talking with them about it, and they all immediately thought they were in trouble.
Yeah.
um which is like
It's
kind of
not a
made me
gun.
sad.
It's not a gun.
Yes, they were like, no. I think I said something like, oh, I noticed that you all like to play with the sticks and you pretend they're guns and all this, and they were like immediately like, no, no, we
Yeah.
don't do that. What are you talking about? And it took like 5 minutes for me to just like really convince them that, like, you're
Yeah.
not in trouble, and I just really want to talk to you.
Yeah.
And so even that kind of gave me like a little more insight as to, like, wow, like, what what I've been saying to them, this automatic no, what they've been hearing throughout their life, like, it's already ingrained in them that, like, this is something that's bad.
Yeah.
uh, and so really just trying to unpack that, and we just had a conversation about it, and I just asked them, what do you like about it, why do you do it? And then we talked just a little bit about how how we can still participate in this type of play while still keeping each other safe and being kind to each other. That those were kind of our agreements in our classroom. Being kind to ourselves, being kind to others, and being kind to the environment, right?
Hmm.
And really, if what you're doing falls within that, then you're good. It doesn't matter to me what you're doing, right? And so really just having conversations with them surrounding that. And then it was such a great conversation with them because they led so much of it, and I kind of came into the conversation with um no goal in mind, really. I kind of just wanted to see what was going to happen. um and we got to talk about some really great things. We talked about consent a lot, which is something that I was wanting to talk with them about,
Hmm.
but trying to find the right way to talk with them about something like that. And so it came up so naturally and organically in this conversation. And we had a really great kind of kind of time together as like our little community, and we kind of collectively came up with these, agreements as to how, if we're going to play this, that's fine, how are we going to do it. And we also had to have conversations about, sometimes if I'm not here one day, the other teachers here might not think the
Yeah.
same way that we're thinking, so we have to make sure that we're remembering that as well. And it was great, and it's funny because I tell that story a lot, and I never want people to feel like I'm like, okay, I had this really great conversation with the kids and now everything was great and you do what I did. Because
Yeah,
literally it was an ongoing conversation that
sure.
continued that afternoon while we were outside. Like we had to, it's those constant reminders. But when it got to the point when I was observing them and listening to them and I was hearing them say those things between themselves, hearing them say like, are you being kind to so and so, they said they want to stop and you're not stopping, we need to
Hmm.
stop, hearing them advocate for themselves and for each other, is really what we want them to learn and want them to do,
Right.
right? And so it was just a really great experience for me. And then it really just led me down this path of like, okay, like let me really figure out what this is about and what they can gain from it, because so many people I feel like are afraid of allowing children to do it because they don't want children to be mean or
Yeah.
violent or hurt each other. But what's interesting is those things didn't really happen any more than normal when I was allowing this type of play. Like it wasn't some huge thing where now all of a sudden they all like
Hmm.
were punching each other all day long.
Right.
um it didn't really change like the behavior into like a more negative way. They actually became more empathetic to each other,
Yeah.
um through this kind of play, and just the just trusting them to be able to handle this and do this on their own, I think also really helped to give them that confidence. And I don't know, it was just really great. So that's
Yeah.
kind of how the whole journey started for me.
Yeah. Made a bunch of notes while you were talking. I want to go back to, but one of the first things you talked about as you told that story was that there's adult discomfort that we have to sort of welcome. And that's so hard because it's discomfort, right? None of
Yes.
us want to
Yes.
intentionally feel bad or have negative, experiences or whatever. So I feel like that's one of the reasons that this is still a pretty hard sell. One of the
Mhm.
reasons. I think there's a list of reasons. Um, to those others, the other teacher you mentioned when you were
Right.
talking to children, sometimes it might be another teacher who's not as comfortable with this. So I don't know, how do we convince another adult that the discomfort is worth it?
It's hard. It's
Answer
hard.
that big question for me.
Right. It is. It's hard because you're right. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable, right? And then when you're trying, when what's the nicest way I could say this? When you're working with people who have been working in the field for a very long time,
Yeah.
it's harder to shift their mindset, right? So I found it
Yes.
easier to bring up these ideas with teachers who are coming into the field, younger teachers, right?
Hmm.
I found it a lot more difficult trying to have this conversation with teachers who have been in the field for a long time, right?
Yeah.
So, and for me, I always say this whenever I talk about weapon play, whenever I talk about this, my goal is not to have every school that's listening to this now go and let all their kids play weapon play. Like that is really not what my goal is, because every program is different and we have to respect the lived experiences of the
Hmm.
families and children in our programs, right? So there are going to be programs where this type of play is just not appropriate because of the community and the environment that the children and the families are living in at that
Yeah.
time. So there's a lot to unpack around that, right? And that's something that is kind of newer for me in this whole like journey of weapon play is how do we support children and families who are in areas of the country or areas of the world where their sons are getting killed for playing with pretend guns, right? Like, so
Yeah.
how can we acknowledge that and understand that kind of life experience? So for me, so much of it comes down to conversation,
Yeah.
period. Like
Yeah.
everything, that's always something that I do all the time, but especially with this, I feel like so much of this comes down to conversation, whether it's conversation with the children, the adults that we work with, the families,
Yeah.
anything like that. Because it's a very uncomfortable thing. It's a very scary thing, especially with this kind of collective trauma that we're all living through right
Yeah.
now, right? Um, so honestly, that's kind of how I go about it. I want to make sure that when I'm talking to someone about this, that I'm making sure that they understand that I'm not trying to change your philosophy on this specifically. I'm trying to help you to think just a little bit
Hmm.
differently about this, and then also about just the reasonings behind why you say and do the things that you do, and why there are certain things that are or are not allowed in your classroom.
Right.
Um, that's
Zero
kind of the big
tolerance is definitely easier for the
yes,
adults, right? Because we can just say,
yes,
well, this is our rule and it's just because.
exactly,
Um,
exactly. It's more so about starting that conversation and trying to figure out a little bit more deeply, like why is this not allowed where you are,
uh-huh.
and unpacking kind of that. And then once you've unpacked that and once you've figured out the reasoning, it's because I'm uncomfortable, it's because of the rules, it's because of the community we live in, whatever it is, then we can kind of take the next step and figure out, okay, how can we move forward with this? How can we support children in this type of play? How can we support children? Um, how can we support children who are experiencing this in their actual life?
Hmm.
How can we support them in the trauma that creates? um yeah, for me it's really just that conversation. I feel like I
Yeah.
kind of just, but it's really about,
Perfect. That's what we do here.
I
Yeah.
like,
So,
you know how like you start talking and then you're like, wait, what?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've got to tell you, a couple of days ago, I recorded with Rusty Keeler. And I'm already nervous when he's on.
Totally.
And there were like 3 times that I started just like babbling, and I would pause to see if he was going to make anything of it. And he was just looking at me like, I don't know what you want me to do. So it's welcomed here, I guess I'll say. So the other thing that in your story that stood out to me is when you talked about when you first approached them and they automatically assumed they were in trouble. I feel like there's 2 ways for an adult to interpret that. One is kind of what you talked about. They've already been taught this lesson that this is something they should avoid. I feel like there are other adults who would see that and say, see, inherently they know that it's wrong, and put this morality lens on it.
Right, right.
And I think we have to be really, that's part of being reflective, right? As we become aware of those
That
reflexes,
is,
I'll say.
and that's exactly right. That's exact, and that's, I mean, those are really the two type of people, the two type of teachers that I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Are the teachers who are like, oh, yeah, wow, they must, that's pretty sad. They've been ingrained in this already. And then there's
Yeah.
the ones who are like, yep.
Yeah. But
Um,
it's so it's constant. It's in every group of children I've ever worked with over, lots of years of working with young children. Um it's not just in the United States that children are doing gunplay, so that tells me that it's whenever I see that kind of persistent repetition of a play theme, that tells me that it's important to childhood and to individual children.
yeah,
And if that's the case, then I need to figure out how can I process this with them, like you're describing.
yeah. I mean, and I think about it in terms of myself too. Like I played that way, when
Hmm.
I was a kid. Like those are the things that we played, um, cops and robbers and those types of things, right?
Yeah.
That's just how we played when I was younger. And we were outside on our own,
Yeah.
and those were just things that we did. And it's one of those things where you think about it, it's like I know this is a type of play that these children are going to explore at some point. Some more than others, some maybe not at all. Um, but I would much rather have a conversation with them about this type of play, talk with them about how you can still explore this and still be respectful and kind to the people around us and the world around us, than kind of shunning this type of play, making it sound bad, making it seem like something really bad that they're doing, and then have them still go do it anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I would just rather talk to them about it.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned when you're having conversations like that, that maybe wouldn't be able to be learned if you had just decided, like, nope, sorry, we're not going to do this, and I'm not going to talk to you about it, and this is just the way that it is.
Yeah.
Because that goes so much more too. Like, for me at least, I don't want these children to grow up to be people who are just like, okay, that's the way it is, guess I got to do it.
Yes.
Right, that's like the
Right.
opposite of
Mm-hmm.
what at least I want children to be like, and I have a hard time saying things like that. I have a hard time being like, no, actually, I don't like this, and this is why.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I have a hard time doing that
Yeah.
because that was never given to me, as a child, because that's just not what they do. And so it's like I'm wanting something better for them
Mm-hmm.
than what I had. And so that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
It's about um just teaching them and showing them that they have power in the things that they're interested in, the things that
Yeah.
they want to talk about, the things that they want to do. Like, everything is valid and able to be kind of talked about.
Yeah. We hear a lot, and some of us talk a lot about not necessarily me, unless I'm being critical of it, the return on investment narrative
Uh-huh,
for what we do with children and the early childhood programs and settings that we have. And it's almost always uh financial, or
yes.
they don't go to prison, or they,
Mhm.
whatever. That's cool. Those are good things.
Yeah.
But when I think about return on investment, I would rather focus on what you're describing, right? Like you're putting your time, your brain, your your passion, your vision, whatever. You're investing all of that in this group of children, for example, in the story you're told, because you see the future value of a generation given that different experience. Does that make sense? See, here's one of those moments where I'm kind of just talking in
No,
circles and
definitely.
not sure I'm making sense, but I think there's a whole different return on investment that we don't talk about, that can
Mhm.
come from building community and seeing children um as Mike Huber would say, experts in their
Mhm.
own development.
Yes. Yes.
And so I think that's such an opportunity that
Yeah.
we have, that we don't often accept.
No, and I think it's interesting that you brought up that whole return on investment idea, because it's like I feel like so much of that, and this is probably another whole nother
I know.
conversation, but
That's
so
what happens.
so much of that is like rooted in this is rooted in this idea of capitalism, right? We
Yes.
need the children to do what we say. We need them to do when we want them to do it. They
Mm-hmm.
need to sit here, they need to listen so they can be productive members of society, which basically means going off and being a sheep to some
Yes.
corporation. But
Not rock the capitalist patriarchal
exactly.
white supremacist boat.
Yes, 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 exactly. Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I guess I want to go now towards um maybe some of the the reasons that it's valuable. We've talked
Mhm.
about reflecting about whether it's going to be allowed or not, but now what happens if we decide to say yes?
I mean, I talked about a little bit, but it's like
Yeah.
these bigger ideas that we want the children to learn, right? These bigger ideas of advocating for themselves and their agency in their body, standing up for others who can't do the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
um, being able to speak up when they are uncomfortable, being able to um, being able to say, I don't like this and I'm not going to be a part of it. I'm going to step away. You need to stop. All those types of things, these ideas of consent, all of that are such important things for these children to learn,
Mm-hmm.
because again, it's ingrained in them that they don't have a voice, that they are not allowed to say no to an
Mm-hmm.
adult, that they owe adults affection, they owe adults like good behavior, all of these types of things,
Blind
right?
compliance.
Yes, that
Yeah.
adults put on them. There was something that I saw going around. I don't know if you had shared it. Someone on
Mhm.
Facebook that said, someone did, that said something that their child brought home from school, and it was like the beginning of school, and it said something like, "What I need to do for school," and one of them said, "Make
Oh.
my teacher happy."
Oh yeah, I didn't share that, but I saw it. Yeah, that
And
made
I'm
me
just like,
sick
and I
to my
was like,
stomach.
"Oh my God, what? If you need a child to make sure that you're happy, you have some serious work to do."
Right. Yes.
But but it's all of those ideas, I think, that for me are the most important things, that I think this type of play, or at least this type of conversation, is a really good way for them to like organically learn those things, right?
Hmm.
um because a lot, they're not going to be they're not going to learn those things if you are controlling the play that they have, if you're controlling the activities that they're doing, if you're controlling the interactions that they're having with each other, right?
Hmm.
So for me, that's the biggest thing. um but then it's really all about children learning themselves and who they are. It's all about children learning how to communicate and interact with other people,
Hmm.
um, conflict resolution, so many of those things that we want children to learn, that we try to get them to learn by telling them a story
I was
or
gonna
by,
say reading a book about
yeah,
about it,
exactly.
and then saying, "Well, you've heard the information.
Yeah, good luck, go do it.
Go out and do it."
Exactly. But it's like when we're giving them these organic things to do, and they're gonna learn it so much better, it's gonna stick with them longer, all of those things that we already know.
Hmm.
um and I talk about benefits of weapon play a lot, and a lot of critics of that just say like, well, they can learn that another way, they
Yeah.
can learn that another way, and I'm like, yeah, I'm sure that they probably could, but there's a deeper underlying thing here.
Hmm.
And for me, that is just that piece of allowing children to have control
Right. I
over.
was just gonna say control
Yes, and
is
that's
so
such a
important.
big issue. So many adult The majority of teachers that I've seen and worked with, the reasons why they do things in their classroom is because of control.
Yes.
They want to have control over the children. They want to have this perceived power over them. I mean, they say all the time, right? The children are out of control.
Yep.
What does that mean?
Hmm.
They're out of your control because it's too much for you, or you can't, whatever. That's the deeper underlying thing here for me, with this type of play,
Hmm.
because we want to raise children who are strong in who they are, who understand their bodies, their limitations, their comfort level, and who are able to empathize and understand those things in others as well. Um, yeah, so for me, that's like
Hmm.
the biggest thing that
Yeah.
I've noticed the children gain from this, because even the children who were in that classroom, that was like 2, 3 years ago now. I still am friends with a lot of their families, and
Hmm.
they'll share with me things that are happening now in elementary school, where they are controlled, right?
Hmm.
And they're talking about things, and they're doing things, and they're like exploring these ideas that we talked about when they were with me, right? I had one of the moms reach out to me and say that her daughter had got in trouble at school
Yeah.
or talking back to the teacher.
Oh God.
It's like, what did what did she say? And she basically was like, the teacher had said something to her, and she didn't like the way she said it to her, and she told her that she didn't like the way she said it to her.
Ugh.
And I was like, oh my God, that makes me so happy.
I
I
know,
was
right?
like, yes, you tell that teacher, tell her you
Yeah.
don't like that.
Yeah.
And so it's like these ideas, they stick, and that's what I want to see out of the children, right?
Hmm.
um yeah.
Yeah. I think about the focus on social emotional learning, and I don't even like that phrase anymore. Like, or to see just SEL, because
Yes.
it so often is just a euphemism for compliance, or or
Yes.
increasing compliance, and cooperation,
Mm-hmm.
and ignores development. But if we were letting them have these experiences that you're describing, they would have so much practice with the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that we think they're missing and requires these later SEL efforts and programs and curriculum kits and um, uh, poster campaigns and whatever else. So when you were you said a minute ago when you talked about the stuff that kids might be learning when they're engaged in this kind of play, and another person saying, well, they can learn that in other ways. Um, what they're talking about is they can learn that in a way that I'm more comfortable with, or they can learn that
Exactly.
in a way that I'm directing and leading.
Yes, exactly.
But we should know, there's no reason not to know at this point in our civilization, that um, intrinsic motivation is what drives real connection to ideas and experiences, and that's learning, right? And the endorphins that are produced when you're having a positive play experience, that's what keeps you curious and keeps you drives you to continue, and that leads to learning.
Mhm.
So it's just such a disconnect for me that I feel
Definitely.
like for me it just seems so obvious, but I think it's,
Yeah.
I don't know, teacher scripts get in the way. And
No, definitely. And I mean, I will say like there are a lot of people who talk with me about this who are legitimately concerned, let's just say, about, like we talked about before, children in programs in communities where they have violence as
yes,
part of, right.
I'm glad you brought that back.
So it's like there are people who are like, I don't know about this. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
just something that is not going to be allowed because so many of these children have experienced this type of
Yeah.
violence in their home and in their family. And I was talking with someone the other day about this, and it brought up this idea for me where we also have to think about when we're talking about things like this and offering this type of play. I'm speaking from a place of privilege that I need to
Mm-hmm.
recognize, right? That in the programs that I've worked with, this is something that can't be easily talked about. And there are other areas where it wouldn't be. And that's why I talk about the importance of this conversation, because
Mm-hmm.
let's say we are working in a program where there is, violence in the community and the children have experienced this in their families and all of this. So that's trauma that the children are going through. And more likely than not, it's not something that's talked about in their home.
Mm-hmm.
Because the families are wanting to shield them from it, which is understandable. They don't want to bring those things into the home. They don't want to talk about these things. So the children are left with things that they're seeing, things that they're hearing, they're not understanding, they don't know how to work through these feelings and have someone listen to them, right?
Yeah.
Not to mention the families too probably are dealing with this and not knowing how to talk about it. And so being able to offer a space for all children where maybe this isn't something that we can play because it means something different in our lives, but this is a safe space where we
Mm-hmm.
can discuss how you're feeling about these things, um, what it makes you think about, what it makes you scared about. We can safely have those conversations and work through these emotions and this trauma that you're kind of experiencing and that we would be collectively experiencing, and
Mm-hmm.
just giving them the space to do that. I think is really, really important. So that's why when I say like I'm not trying to get everyone to play with weapons all the time, because I understand that in some areas and some programs that's just not going to be something that can be done.
Mm-hmm.
um, and we have to understand and respect the lived experiences of the people and the families that we work with.
Mm-hmm.
But the conversation is the most important piece.
Yeah.
That's what the most important piece is, because whether or not I had these children do weapon play, we were still having these conversations around consent. We were still having these conversations around speaking up for yourself, and it's okay to say no, and all of
Mm-hmm.
these types of things. Those things that we're talking about, the children learning these kind of powerful kind of who I am as myself kind of feelings, they can learn that through the conversation as well, and they can learn that through the other experiences that we provide in the classroom and during the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because weapon play is not the only type of play that we should be allowing the children to do freely and we don't have any control over, right? The children should be doing whatever they want to do
Yes.
throughout the day.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what area we're in or what activity it is that we're doing. Like the children should be free to play and move and learn and we're there to guide that
Right.
and support
It's it's not like I went to this workshop and they said weapon play is really valuable. So we're going to open a weapons center in the classroom. We're going to have it on the shelf.
them.
And we're going to schedule time for it on the lesson plan. It is just holding space for it when it appears in their
Yes.
play,
Yes.
and figuring out then when I see it, how
Mhm.
will I respond? How will I know what they need from me
Yes.
as a result
Yes.
of seeing it? It's like so much else. We observe what's important to them, and that should guide our thinking
Mhm.
and acting with young children.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and I mean, even children in areas where there is violence, they might still act those things out because that's what they're seeing and that's what they're hearing
And
about.
that's how they make sense of their world.
Exactly.
It is sort of taking the power into their own play.
Exactly. And so by allowing that or supporting that in the way that is right for our specific community and our specific program is such a great way for the children to not only work through those feelings, but to also understand that, again, what they think, what they feel, what they say, all of those things matter.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those things are important because, again, so often, like, adults just don't respect children,
Yes.
period, right?
Right.
Children are never like the things that they're feeling, the things that they're saying, like, are never actually valid to adults because we hear it all the time, especially, oh God, like going to the grocery store or something, right? It is like is crying about something. Oh, you're fine, you're fine, you're
Yeah.
fine. Clearly, I'm not fine,
Right.
actually.
Right.
I'm really fine. And so it's like they're ingrained in that thing again, like they were when they thought they were in trouble. They're ingrained in this idea of like, my feelings don't matter. What I have to say doesn't matter. And by creating a space where we're allowing their ideas and we're allowing their emotions and their feelings to be free
Mm-hmm.
and to be celebrated and to be talked about, it's going to lead to them just being so much more emotionally healthy as they grow up. And I mean, that's what so many of us are spending so much money in therapy trying to get
Yeah.
to now,
Yeah.
right?
I think there is a mental health connection to a lot of our responses to play
Mhm.
as a field. But one of the things that was really impactful for me when I was starting to change my mind, and I was one of those people who'd been doing it a long time, and was changing my mind later in my career. But one of the things was the idea that um, when children show you something in play, they're showing you what they're interested in, what they think is important, and what they're curious about. And when we just blankly stop it and say that's bad,
Mhm.
when we throw that morality layer onto their ideas, but also that value judgment,
Mhm.
uh, they're consistently getting the message that my ideas are bad, and what my body's telling me I should be doing is bad. And so am I bad? And how does that process as those repeated experiences can really, have a negative impact on emotional development, mental health. So even, yeah, when you're saying, I'm not saying everybody should change their mind and allow it, you're just suggesting that we take it seriously, right?
Yes.
When children show it to us, we take it seriously.
Mhm. I
And
mean, it's all about just thinking a little bit deeper
mhm,
about the work that we do and why we do the way that why we do things the way that we do them. And that self-reflection piece is such a huge piece of the work that we do, right?
yeah.
Because every single day there's something when I come back home, I'm like, ugh, I really should have said that
Yeah.
differently, or I shouldn't have done that, and that's going to happen all the
Mhm,
time because we're working with children, right? But it's that self-reflection piece where we think about, okay, I that's not how I wanted this to be. Why did that happen that way? What caused me to say that or respond that way?
mhm,
And what can I do differently going forward? And so that's really what it's about. It's just thinking more deeply about topics that have always just been automatically something that we don't do, or something that we do.
Right.
You know, there's all these things that I think are part of this traditional early education that really need that deeper look,
Uh-huh.
to really figure out if what we're doing is right for
Mm-hmm.
children, what we're doing is supportive, and all of those things. So I mean, that's really what it comes down to for me. You know, there are really great things that the children can learn from this type of play. But it's about opening your mind a little bit more, um, digging just a little bit deeper into your own lived experiences and
Mm-hmm.
your own kind of journey in early education and what has brought you to this space. And then just allowing yourself to, number one, be uncomfortable, and number two, just allow yourself to trust in the children.
Mm-hmm.
They know themselves, they know the things that they want to do and the things that they like. And when we show them that we trust them in that, they believe in themselves even more,
Mm-hmm.
because the person that they look up to is trusting them and is saying that these things are okay. um and that's a hard thing to do. It's hard to think deeply about the things that you do. It's hard to reflect on things that you do and try to figure out why. It's hard to change your way of thinking
Mm-hmm.
about things like this. But I mean, at the end of the day, hopefully we're all here to try to make a better world for the children and make better experiences for them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's just that's part of what we sign up for when we get into this field, right? Is being able to make these changes and advocate for what we feel like is right for children, whether it's something that we've done forever or something that we've never done.
Yeah. And the word we haven't used, but it has been sort of underlying all of this, is relationship, right?
Yes.
It gives children, reflective teachers, I think, are better at creating those safe, attached, positive relationships where we know learning happens best and
Mhm.
development happens best. And so we're giving them a chance to try these things out within the context of a safe relationship with an
Yes.
adult.
And I mean, just think about like what we're modeling for them by doing these self-reflective practices, where they're seeing from us, again, somebody who is an important adult in their life that they look to. They're seeing that person think differently about the way that they're saying things,
Mm-hmm.
apologizing to children, thinking of things and being like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, how can I change it? Or I don't know how to do this, let's work together. Like, they're
Mm-hmm.
learning all these things, like, wow, I don't really have to know everything. I
Yeah.
don't have to stick with one way. It's okay to change my mind. It's okay to think differently. And those are great things for them to know as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's about probably time to wrap up. Is there anything you wanted to make
You were
sure
right. You were
you
right.
talk, I know, talked about or mentioned that we haven't hit yet? Or
I mean, honestly, just allow children to have conversations with them, trust them,
yeah.
and just think differently about the work that we do. It's not, I mean, it's hard, but that's what's so important about building this community of other educators
Mm-hmm.
who are thinking the same way or working through the same things, because it is hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're working in a program that is very traditional or is very against these kind of progressive,
I was gonna say progressive.
um,
Yes.
these progressive ideas, right? It can be really hard to be the teacher who believes in these things or who wants to
Mm-hmm.
work towards these things, right? And so that's another reason why this kind of building of this community that we're all building together is important as well, because
Yeah.
it's like I could be at school here in Portland and be like, oh my gosh, I'm having such a hard day. But I know that so and so's out here rooting for me and they're over here rooting for me, and I can come
Yeah.
back to this, get these, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's just it's hard, but it's part of, what we sign up for.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you so much for this. I think
Yes,
people are
thank
really
you.
going to connect to this conversation. So I appreciate your time and your brain and your heart and all that stuff. What? So let's tell them once more how to find you, where to find
Yes.
you.
Find me over on on Instagram at Honoring Childhood. That's where I do most of my stuff.
Yeah.
My website, honoringchildhood.org. My podcast, Honoring Childhood. Everything is the same name, Honoring
Uh-huh.
Childhood.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, check it out and reach out to me. Like I love talking about this kind of stuff, as I'm sure you could tell. Yeah, go check out what I'm doing, and yeah, let's talk some more because I like to talk. I love talking about really anything that has to do with childhood,
Hmm.
and well, with people who actually love talking about childhood is great
Yes.
because I'll talk about this stuff all day with my husband, and he's like, "Oh, cool,
Oh yeah, that's nice.
hey."
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I think that's why we start podcasts, right? To trick
yes.
people into talking about childhood with us. All right. Well, this was really great. Thanks again, and thanks everybody for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.